From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this first weekend of April. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. It's USDA's first official look at what growers plan to plant this year. We'll share some of the surprises that sprung from USDA's reports on Friday. Plagued by drought, Texas cotton farmers are faced with some tough decisions this spring.
I've got cottonseed booked, I've got corn seed booked, and I've got grain sorghum seed booked, and I don't know what we're going to plant.
We'll show you what's at risk for an area known as the largest cotton patch in the U.S. The calendar now says April, but are you prepared to plant?
I think as a grower, if you think you know everything about farming, you just wait for Mother Nature to come around and she'll show you don't.
How you can protect yields in your fields with a focus on weed control. And in John's world.
Looks like rain to me.
Now for the news. As we prepare to kick off another planting season, USDA is out with projections of how many acres of corn, soybeans, cotton, and wheat farmers intend to plant this year. USDA says farmers intend to plant significantly more corn acres in 2023. The prospective plantings report released Friday shows U.S. farmers plan to plant nearly 92 million acres of corn, which is more than 1 million acres higher than pre-report estimates and a 3.42 million acre jump from last year. Soybean acres, those are up slightly from 2022 at 87.5 million. All wheat is up 9% at 49.9 million. And cotton acres are down 18% from last year at 11.3 million acres. Now, the grain stocks report did seem to be one that grabbed the trade's attention on Friday, with USDA revealing corn and soybean stocks tighter than expected as of March 1st. Corn stocks came in at 7.4 billion compared to 7.75 billion last year. USDA shows soybean stocks at 1.68 billion compared to 1.93 billion the same time last year. And wheat stocks are now under 1 million. Well, two companies say they will no longer move Russian grain. They are Cargill and Viterra. Cargill handles up to 5% of Russia's annual wheat exports and a small amount of corn. The Russian Agriculture Ministry says Cargill's decision will not affect its volume of domestic grain shipments. Market watchers tell us the Russian government is looking to completely own and control its grain exports.
This sounds like a move from Russia to gain more control over their export situation and have it less privatized. So by doing that, they're going to, if they can get in control of every little piece of that, then they're going to be able to say, we'll export to you or we won't export to you.
And the war in Ukraine does appear to be putting a strain on Russia's finances. The Wall Street Journal reporting the country's biggest exports, gas and oil, have lost major customers. It says the ruble is down over 20% since November against the dollar, and the labor force has shrunk as young people are sent to the front lines or flee the country over fears of being drafted. But there's concerns here at home when it comes to moving ag products around. Right now, America is experiencing an 80,000 truck driver shortage. At the same time, the median age of a truck driver in the industry is between 51 and 52 years old. That's why Congressman Dusty Johnson of South Dakota and Jim Costa of California introduced the Ship It Act in the House. The bill would incentivize new truck drivers to enter the workforce, and it streamlines the CDL process. However, it does allow states to increase truck weight limits by allowing 6-axle 91,000-pound semis to operate on the interstate system. It's been endorsed by several groups, including the Soy Transportation Coalition, as a way to move more freight more efficiently and at a cost savings.
A lot of states allow heavier weight limits with additional axles on the state and the local system. We think it should be also allowed on the interstate system, and that's the part of our surface transportation system that's built to the highest engineering standard, but yet in many cases it has the lowest weight limits allowed. So we think that makes a lot of sense to do that. We need to find ways to increase truck efficiency I think this is a really good first step.
He says this will also help decrease shipping costs, especially for ag export customers. But right now, a lot of old crop corn is heading to China, the country continuing with its string of buys it's made that started during the middle of March. We've been keeping a running total with this chart, now totaling more than 3 million metric tons or more than 128 million bushels. The Senate this week passing a bill that would block the new Waters of the U.S. rule. It would overturn an EPA rule that defines navigable waters and restore protections put in place by the Clean Water Act. Opponents say it's too restrictive and places a burden on farmers and agribusinesses. 5 Democrats did join Republicans in the 53-43 vote. The resolution now goes to President Biden, who has threatened to veto it. The American Farm Bureau Federation applauding senators for voting in favor of repealing. We are still awaiting a ruling from the Supreme Court, which could change the current rule. And there are now questions about the future of a pork processing plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. PorkBusiness.com says the company is putting the proposed $500 million processing facility on hold. According to an interview in Meeting Place, the company pursuing a joint plant with Prestige in Eagle Grove, Iowa. That's expected to be operational in 2024. Holstone's CEO says they like the Sioux Falls location, but have decided to pursue this joint venture opportunity first. All right, that's it for the news. It does not look like spring right now in the northern U.S. More severe and winter weather hitting the country this week. We'll have a check of your latest forecast next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. The new Loadmaster 2X harvesting dual box dump cart is capable of lifting and dumping up to 60,000 pounds of product and filling 36 or 40-foot semi-trailers in just one dump. Find out more at the H&S website.
Time now for a check of weather. Andrew Whitmire joining us this weekend. Andrew, severe weather hitting the middle of the country on Friday, as well as another winter storm causing concerns about flooding. Hopefully your 30-day outlook shows signs of relief for areas that have just been inundated with moisture in March.
And Tyne, before we get into the outlook for April, let's go ahead and talk about spring flooding that is on many minds, especially the far northern states where parts of the Dakotas as well as parts of the upper Midwest still have several inches of snow still on the ground. And as we take a look at that spring flooding outlook here, as this will be a concern going through the month of April, we're going to be watching the Mississippi, especially around the Davenport area, where we could be looking at some major flooding concerns, according to the National Weather Service, as well as the Red River Valley up into parts of North Dakota, as well as parts of Minnesota. We'll have to watch out for flooding as well there, where again there are several inches still on the ground. And of course, the Sierra Mountain ranges, where we have been inundated with some historical snowfall throughout this winter season. We're going to be watching for a lot of spring runoff here, and that's going to increase the potential for mudslides here as we head on into the heart of the spring months. Looking at root zone here, again, we're still dry where it's been continuous dry, and still wet where it's been wet across the Great Lakes all the way down to the deep south, and as well as the California coastline, where we've been kind of inundated with some of those waves of moisture, as well as parts of the Intermountain West as well. And the red areas, unfortunately, are going to continue to dry out here. Looking at the drought monitor, well, it's almost a resemblance of, again, the root zone map, where you're not seeing any color out there. That's where the soil is saturated, and where we're seeing some of those darker and deeper reds here, that's an extreme to an exceptional drought that again continues to grow now across parts of Kansas as well as parts of Oklahoma. And it doesn't look like much relief is going to be headed our way here as we take a look at precipitation. Looking at precipitation for this week, well, places that don't need more snow are likely going to get more snow up across the Dakotas, upper portions of Minnesota, and that will only aid to flooding concerns. Meanwhile, we'll see a chance here for a few spotty showers and thunderstorms as we go throughout this week. And looking in the next week, it finally looks like that atmospheric river will finally shut off out west for a brief moment. Meanwhile, we're still going to be looking at above average precipitation, especially down across the deep south as well as the Dixie Alleyway. And we have to turn our attention to the jet stream here for this week. And as we walk you through the jet stream here on this Monday, we're going to be watching that trough developing out west. That will eventually try to work its way eastward some, allowing for some severe weather across the Dixie Alleyway. But check out, by next weekend, we'll likely get another ridge setting up out west, and that'll begin to shut off the moisture for the western coast.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, USDA had several reports hit the markets on Friday. Between acreage and WASDE, what surprises could continue to move the markets? Pete Meyer and Joe Vaclavic join me next. Well, welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Big report day on Friday. So to digest the numbers, we have Pete Meyer as well as Joe Vaclavic. Pete, I'll start with you because we had a bunch of different reports that hit on Friday. Acreage, grain stocks. What was the biggest surprise for you?
I think that the small size of the grain stocks was probably a bigger surprise. We never really put much stock into the prospective plannings report because it is so early. And even when you talk to NASS does not like issuing the report. If there's one report NASS would like to get rid of, it's prospective plannings. But what are the takeaways you have? Okay, so corn acres are up about 1 million than our survey, and are up 3.4 million from last year. But it's where the acres sit. 1.3 million acres in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, which from all indications will not be able to get into the field until mid-April when the temperature breaks. Record snowpack, cold temperatures coming. Okay, 87, but it makes sense, Tyne, because economically speaking, farmers should be planting corn.
Yeah, and Pete, you mentioned that your, S&P Global Commodity Insights, your survey indicated that we would see more corn acres, but it is above what the trade had even expected, Joe. But you're saying it wasn't that big of a surprise?
Compared to past instances of this report, there have been years where the trade will miss corn acres by 3 million or more than that. There have been years where the trade will miss corn stocks by 200 million, 300 million. We missed acres by 1 million in corn. We missed stocks by 70 million. This is not, there was nothing in this report that was overly surprising compared to maybe a normal prospective plantings report like this. For the trade to miss corn by 1 million, I mean, those sort of misses are to be expected in this sort of deal. So I didn't see any like real major surprises versus what the trade had estimated, at least.
Joe, but when you look at these acres and the prospective plantings report, which crop do you think maybe those numbers could grow from now until we get the new numbers in June? And which one do you think maybe is at risk of losing some acres?
I feel like there's a big divide in the corn situation versus the soybean situation. If you take these acreage numbers, you plug them into the balance sheets, you mess around with the stocks and kind of plug in what's out there. I feel like the soybean balance sheet has the potential to get incredibly tight, and the corn situation has the potential to become incredibly loose. But again, that's assuming that these acreage numbers are correct, and I'd probably go with Pete's notion that this is going to be about the highest corn acreage number that you see.
Pete, USDA also has principal acres up quite a bit. Do you agree when you put all of these acreage numbers together? Do you agree with what USDA is thinking this year?
Well, I'd love to see what they're using for prevent plant. I mean, we're using 3 million for prevent plant, and that's why we don't even get close to the number they're talking about. Economically, we understand. I mean, you understand with these prices the way they are, but like we talked about a little bit earlier, the economics suggest the corn. But when we look at last year, when we had decent sized corn, granted the acres went down at the end of the year given what happened in Nebraska and some of the states that experienced heavy drought. But we're 30 cents below the crop insurance price in corn at the moment. Last year at this point, we were $1 above the crop insurance price. So I'm with Joe. I think the corn acres come down a bit, depending on the weather as well. They may plant some soybeans. But as far as the whole acreage pie, I mean, look, cotton acres are down. Spring wheat acres are going to be down. We think spring wheat acres could be as low as 10 million. The USDA came out today, I think, around 10.6. The cotton number looks right. You've got heavy winter wheat acres, which in some parts of Kansas will fail and will be planted with double crop beans on top of it. So, we're not making land in this country, and I really have a hard time when we start to talk about principal crops being planted in this many acres.
All right, Joe, now that we do have this prospective plantings report, now that we do have the grain stocks report, where does the trade's focus shift?
I mean, weather would be the obvious answer, but I think there's some things on the demand side of the balance sheet. How much more corn does China want to buy? When you start to look at the lower corn stocks number that USDA published today, okay, so pair the lower corn stocks number with the idea that USDA may now be understating corn exports if this China demand thing continues. I mean, you could be looking at a drastically lighter old crop carryout number for corn, which is, you know, your beginning stocks for the new crop balance sheet, which we're just kind of getting started with these acreage numbers. So I think the demand side is important, and weather, you know, ultimately come June, July will be the biggest factor.
All right, we need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report. Well, we talked about the wet weather earlier in the show, but as the calendar starts creating nervousness about the possibility of planting problems, John Phipps provides some perspective on combating those weather worries this year.
One of the many advantages of advancing age is the ability to start worrying ahead of time. For farmers who do essentially the same things at the same times each year, we gradually accumulate a mental file of what those years were like. Now, most of those fade into a mass of average growing seasons, but those with particular problems stick in our memory more clearly. For our farm, many ghosts of the past that haunt me are wet years. And even though it's only the 1st of April, my brain has decided, why wait until the last second to begin fretting? While the northern Midwest has coped with snow and storms, until March, our winter was remarkably mild, albeit short on sunshine. A lot of field work was accomplished in midwinter. Then after that deceptively warm, dry February, the familiar cruelest month began to live up to its name. On the bright side, our worries from last year about soil moisture inventory have been laid to rest, but the specter of a wet spring now looms larger. Mid and long-range forecasts, which we have come to trust more each year, speak consistently of colder and wetter than usual days ahead. Unlike abnormally dry years, soggy ground can't be corrected with one thunderstorm overnight. Not only does the rain have to stop, but we will need wind and sun for days before we set foot in the fields. Our strange habit of seeking out news of areas even worse off than we are to make us feel better really only concentrates our anxiety. Recollections of seasons from heck expand to apocalyptic proportions with each recitation. Even our determined efforts to look on the bright side, like congratulating ourselves for doing a lot of drainage work, is thin comfort. I think my own concerns originated in the words of a climatologist decades ago when I heard him predict larger and more frequent rain events as the climate changed. The Corn Belt is a mashup of too wet and too dry every year, and each farm has its own unique weak spot. Around here, a delightful series of relatively benign planting seasons has undoubtedly encouraged that fabled false sense of security, encouraging some of us to push the limits of machines, humans, and productivity. If you already run extended hours on enormous machines, what happens when the time available is shrunk dramatically? No wonder we hate wet planting season. They are the worst, except for wet harvests, of course.
Thank you, John. Well, when we come back, we're heading to the Cornhusker State to find a farmall. Machinery Pete, he has Tractor Tales next.
U.S. Farm Report is sponsored by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator steel closing wheels, perfected in conventional, excels in no-till. Order 12 to 16 rows today and qualify for free shipping or 20% off an end zone moisture management package. Tractor Tales on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Farmall. 100 years of milestones, community, and memories. Since 1923, it's been the one for all. Celebrate with Case IH at rightredtractor.com.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. Come along with me this week. We're heading to Nebraska to check out a young man's hard work on some classic iron.
So this is a 48 International Super M. I bought it from a family friend. They said that their dad bought it. He sadly passed away, and they just wanted to keep it around the community or somebody that'd take care of it. So they sold it to me just as a little token, and just for me to kind of play around with and tinker with, and managed to get it running pretty good. It means a lot to me just to show that they trust me to take care of them, keep them operational, and just keep them all in all just in good shape. It was in running condition, but there's just something off about it. And just the carburetor a little bit, and it fired right up. It's a little bit rough with this single front. It's the only one of mine with just that single front for the tricycle. And I didn't think it'd make that much of a difference, but you can feel that in the seat and you can feel that in the turning. It's just a different ride. You kind of have a little bit more cushion there. And then with two wheels, you can turn it a lot easier standing still. I have a hard time turning this thing standing still just because of how big and grippy that wheel is.
Still to come, well, the drought monitor shows you Texas's struggle with ongoing drought, but it's not until you hit the fields and walk the rows that you see just how dry it truly is. Next, we take you to West Texas, where farmers aren't just worried about what they'll plant this year, but also how the essential infrastructure will be able to weather this storm. That's our Farm Journal Report.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Well, there's no denying Texas is dry. The U.S. Drought Monitor just released Thursday shows 80% of the state is faced with dry conditions and 17% is seeing extreme drought. With very little moisture all year, farmers are faced with some very tough decisions, and it's creating concerns about cotton, as we show you in this weekend's Farm Journal Report. It's hard to forget these scenes from just a month ago.
We had 90-mile-an-hour winds here. I had 6 center pivots that went down.
I've been here my entire life, and that was one of the worst ones I've seen.
The winds kicking up an eerie red cloud of dirt. It also created static electricity that added insult to injury for farmers who were already staring at a bleak winter wheat crop.
One thing we're fortunate that a lot of the ground was covered with wheat for cover crop and or grazing and or harvest. So. But the chances of a dryland harvest crop on wheat is fading by the day.
Travis Myers farms 45 miles south of Lubbock. He says they've seen less than a half inch of rain all winter long, and last year was a similar story.
I've been farming for 40-something years. I didn't have a row of cotton last year on any of my farms. We didn't even get our irrigated up.
With soil moisture profiles already empty, it's causing more concerns about this year's crops.
I'm not trying to be negative, but we're probably in worse shape going into this crop than we were last year, and because we like even more rain to catch up. We're going to have several rains before we can even plant, because it is dry 4 or 5 foot deep.
Just 5 weeks away from the start of cotton planting, and farmers here are wondering if they'll even be able to grow a crop on their parched dryland acres.
It's time for us to start strip tilling and making some decisions about planting and stuff, and it's really scary to do anything, because if you put a tractor in the field, there's a good chance of it turning loose and blowing out at this point.
As farmers across the plains weigh their options of what to plant, delaying those decisions has become a growing theme.
I've got cottonseed booked, I've got corn seed booked, and I've got grain sorghum seed booked. And I don't know what we're going to plant.
Probably as late in the year as we've ever been undecided on cropping conditions and our planting intentions. It's with the ratio of corn to grains, there's still a chance that some could go to grain, but for the most part in this area it's cotton country.
USDA's prospective plantings report on Friday showed farmers intend to plant 11.3 million acres of cotton this year. That's down 18% from last year. But as Darren Hudson points out, the acreage picture could shrink even further as abandoned acres could be high.
They're going to be big. If we don't get some rain pretty quickly, there'll be acres planted. It's still going to be lower than historical because their grain alternatives are better. But I think we're going to have a lot of dryland planted acres that may not make it.
It's no secret cotton acres could see a sharp drop. This week, cotton prices did see a boost, but since fall, cotton prices have drifted lower.
I'm a diehard cotton person, like I told you. That's made our country out here. But right now, the market's telling you not to plant it. And it's crazy. We don't really understand a lot of the fundamentals of it right now.
This planting intentions report might move the market a little bit, but we'll see what happens. But I do think there's a number of structural issues on the demand side that are probably weighing heavy on the future expectations.
Growers say today's prices aren't enough to cover their costs.
I guess 2 years ago, an 80-cent cotton price would look attractive, but with our high input costs, the current commodity price for cotton is not covering cost of production. So.
Grains may pencil on paper, but farmers here say there's a reason cotton is typically king.
We're very limited on our irrigation, and course, cotton's a good drought-tolerant crop, and it'll just be, and like I said, the chances of some of this wheat going to harvest right now is not that great.
So why is this area home to the largest cotton patch in the U.S.? Well, the first is cotton doesn't require as much water as corn to be grown here. But the other piece of it is the amount of infrastructure built to support the cotton industry.
We're very concerned about infrastructure, especially if we have several back-to-back years of a lesser than desirable base crop, because it has a huge toll on them.
Cody Besant is CEO of Plains Cotton Growers, and he says business after business relies on cotton production year after year.
They rely solely on volume, and without that volume, they lose the financial means to maintain overhead, to maintain employees, and to maintain the doors, quite frankly, open.
And he says once Mother Nature does finally provide the much-needed relief, cotton's raw fiber is one that needs robust infrastructure to process and then market that crop.
I was at an event the other day, and I remembered this, but a gentleman that started in the cotton industry in the early 90s said there was roughly 520 cotton gins in Texas. And because of some of the catastrophic events we've seen over time, we're down to 184 today. And so our volume is shrinking.
Plains Cotton Growers is working on infrastructure assistance both at the state and federal level, knowing these cotton gins have to survive in order for all of Texas's cotton industry to thrive. But today, the reality is, without essential rains between now and June, the prospects of planting and growing cotton here are dwindling by the day.
As high as input costs are, it's a big gamble to plant it hoping it'll go up. I mean, that's just not a very good business decision at this time.
Now, there's also concerns about what a recession would do to cotton prices. Hudson told me out of all the ag commodities, cotton is the most sensitive to inflationary pressures. Since cotton is a semi-durable good, he says cotton is the one that tends to follow the cycle of recessions, whereas history shows most other ag commodities are typically counter-cyclical to recessions. Well, speaking of commodity prices, our marketing roundtable conversation picks back up right after the break. Welcome back for our marketing roundtables. Peter Meyer, Joe Vaclavic. Peter, in our last roundtable, Joe ended by talking about China, that really is the big wild card. We saw more purchases from China this week for U.S. corn. How much left do you think China does have to buy?
Well, that's the question. And we agree with Joe 100% in that, if China stops buying today, you're going to have a real problem in the corn market. If China continues to buy, you're going to have a much tighter balance sheet. It's anybody's guess. It could be 2 million, it could be 5 million, it could be 7 million tons. We're just really not sure. But we do think that without this sell-off that we saw in late February or early March, China would not have been in the market. China is a value buyer, and they bought the value, and they did a good job of it. But the question now is, will they come back?
Some other news this week that we were watching, Joe, is the announcement from two major grain companies saying they're going to exit Russia, one of those being Cargill. When you look at that situation, we did see wheat prices respond. How does that change things as we look at that really going into effect here this summer?
As it stands now, there doesn't appear to be an issue with exports. It sounds like Russia or Russian companies are going to restaff these Cargill facilities, these Viterra facilities, maybe some ADM facilities, maybe Dreyfus as well. So there's not, the way it stands now, it doesn't sound like there's going to be a disruption, but just the possibility that maybe there could be is a big deal for the wheat market. Russia's the top wheat exporter in the world this year. They're supposed to account for, I think, 25% of all global wheat exports. So if there's any disruption, even if it's just an imagined disruption, the trade thinks for a minute that it's possible. And maybe that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a friendly factor, but for it to be realized and for the wheat to sustain the rally that we've just seen here, you may need to see some actual disruption.
What is Russia's overall goal here, do you think, Pete?
It's their goal. It's their goal all the time, right? They let companies establish nice businesses in oil and in grains and whatever, and then they just repatriate it. I don't know. They're trying to control their own destiny. Whether this works out or not, I don't know. As Joe mentioned, they're the largest wheat exporter around. What are they going to do with it all? I mean, yeah, okay, we could see some go into feed wheat, feed supplies around the world, but it's hard to say what's on the minds of the Russians at the moment.
All right, Joe, real quick before we go, we saw some impressive action again when it comes to this cattle market. I mean, a lot of questions of how high can this cattle market go? What is fueling the market right now?
I think it's the cash trade. I mean, the cash trade this week, there was cash trade as good as 170, and it could be better than that late in the week. That's something we haven't seen in a while. You're getting close to all-time highs in some of these feeder cattle contracts. You had that sell-off, like in the correction a couple weeks ago, that I think may have had something to do with the banking crisis that happened at the same time. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, because the fundamentals of cattle appear to be pretty rock solid. So we're off to the races. New contract highs. It looks awfully good.
All right, Joe, Peter, thank you so much for joining us after these big reports this week. We appreciate the insight. We need to take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on U.S. Farm Report.
Prepare for Planting, a U.S. Farm Report special series, is brought to you exclusively by Bayer and XtendFlex.
Well, as you saw in the Farm Journal report, a drought in Texas is delaying field work. But in parts of the Midwest, it's the other extreme, keeping farmers out of the fields. But now's not just a crucial time for spring fertilizer, it's also an important window to spray for weeds as we help you prepare for planting. After a dry fall and little moisture in early winter, Illinois farmer Corey Utterback says they're now dealing with the other extreme.
The month of March has been wet. We're extremely saturated now. I'd say that we've probably replenished subsoil, so we're ready for it to quit any time.
From making some changes to get liquid fertilizer on faster to other prep work, if Mother Nature starts to cooperate, they're nearly prepared to plant.
We're just about done. We've got just a little bit of maintenance on some tillage. So we think by the end of the week, we're ready to go.
This year, this Crawford County farm is planting more of his acres in corn.
We're closer to 60% corn than soybeans. Part of that is we like growing corn better than we do beans. We think it presents a better ROI for us.
But once he can get in the field, he will start with soybeans.
That's probably the biggest thing that we've changed in the last 5 years, is the emphasis on trying to get the beans planted first, and we really want to get them planted in April if we can.
The other changes Utterback has made is switching to liquid fertilizer and getting an even earlier start on spraying weeds.
When you make the choice to go to some organic-based fertilizers, that also brings in some other weeds with it, and the weeds that you do have, it turns them into Jurassic Park around here if you don't get them sprayed on time.
He says ideally they like to start their weed control program in the fall.
If we can't get it on in the fall, we still want to start clean. Right now we're clean, you know, but the temperature is going to be changing. We're going to get more sunlight, so it's going to produce germination.
He says if they do need to push it to spring, he wants to be spraying now, and then they'll come back in 3 weeks after planting and lay another residual down.
It's a 3 or 4 pass program. A lot of residuals in place. We don't want to give the weeds a chance to start, is what the goal is.
For University of Tennessee's Larry Steckel, Utterback's plan is on target.
Our weeds are a lot more sensitive to a lot of herbicides when they're smaller. Once they get some height, they are a struggle to control.
Steckel says the effectiveness of many post-emergence herbicides have declined over the past few years.
We're finding here in Tennessee over the last 3 or 4 years, we're just not getting real good weed control. So we're going back to trying to keep the weeds from ever coming up.
So how early is too early? Steckel says for best weed control, farmers should try to spray 30 days out.
There's actually some pretty good work by my colleague Jason Bond down at Mississippi State with ryegrass, and we're really struggling trying to control ryegrass here in the Mid-South in corn. And he found for every day inside of 30 days you didn't control ryegrass, you lost about a bushel a day. So, you know, you can lose up to 30 bushel if you're killing it right at planting.
Waiting to take out weeds is a decision that could come at a cost.
That early weed control window from, 2 weeks before planting to really about 3 to 4 weeks post planting, that window, you really got to keep the field clean in. That's when you're going to get most of your yield loss from competition from weeds.
Utterback admits spraying before you even see that weeds will be a problem has been a shift.
It's a weird feeling. It's a mindset that you're out here spraying and there's really nothing here visually that it appears that you're killing, but typically if the weather's right, then that's going to buy us enough time to get to canopy.
But Steckel says it's a strategy that works.
I've never really had a phone call where somebody complained about a weed failure because they sprayed too early. It was always because they were delayed a week or two.
Utterback knows change can be uncomfortable, but in farming, change is inevitable.
I think as a grower, if you think you know everything about farming, you just wait for Mother Nature to come around and she'll show you you don't.
And sometimes creating change on your own farm can produce the biggest rewards.
You're always looking for that one thing that's going to gain you 5 or 10 bushel on corn or three bushel on beans. So we've got a few things in the mix that we're going to try this year.
Now, next week, we'll focus on the weather piece of the spraying puzzle and what to do if you are delayed in getting into fields, prepping those for planting. All right, when we come back, what's the waste created by wind energy? Customer support is next. Well, just this week, the Biden administration announcing it wants to build 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy by 2030, which would be enough to power more than 10 million homes. And as the White House pushes this path, are there efforts also creating more waste? That's customer support this week.
This week we have a comment about renewable energy decommissioning costs. Since you are covering most of the positives about solar and wind, why not cover the back-end huge waste issues? Solar and wind producing components are not recyclable. They are filling landfills with blades that do not decompose and panels that contain toxic items. Like car batteries, home and industrial batteries have to be replaced, adding more cost. Please be balanced in your segments. This is from Scott Poteet in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Scott, I need your address for your mug. Waste issues for renewables may seem huge, but not when compared to the alternatives. One problem is what they call the availability bias. We gape at the huge blades going down the highway and never even notice the thousands of garbage trucks. This criticism is similar to the claim green technologies aren't emission-free, which I'll tackle next week. First, solar panels are 90 to 95% recyclable, but too few have been retired here to establish an industry in that, as is happening in France. Lithium iron phosphate batteries, the current standard, are 95% recyclable and required to be recycled by the EPA. Turbine blades are not filling up our landfills. After I wasted several hours on a spreadsheet, I discovered the Electric Policy Research Institute, an independent nonprofit, had already calculated that all the blade waste through 2050, that's roughly 25 years, would equal exactly 0.15% of all U.S. solid waste for just 1 year. Since we're only beginning to replace blades, we're just now learning how to handle these awkward products. After blades are removed, the balance of the wind turbine is 85% recyclable. It's just steel and wiring mainly. The blades are cut into pieces to allow tighter packing and make easier trucking. Made of fiberglass, carbon fibers, and epoxy, they do not pollute water tables like old oil equipment, for example. The need for proper disposal has prompted some landfills in Wyoming, South Dakota, and Iowa to specialize in receiving them. It has been very lucrative for Casper, Wyoming, funding the entire waste department and more. In addition, a handful of startups will soon be grinding blades near or on site to eliminate transportation costs. Here are all the numbers. We generate 270 million tons of solid municipal waste annually. Coal-fired generators add another 140 million tons of often toxic coal ash and scrubber sludge. Turbine blades contribute an average 36,000 tons per year. There is waste with solar and wind, but it is trivial compared to fossil fuel byproducts.
Thanks, John. But what is the actual cost? Well, when you look at the straight cost of wind energy, reports show an average-sized commercial wind turbine costs between $2.6 million to $4 million, and maintenance runs between $42,000 and $48,000 per year. All right, when we come back, weather is an issue for farmers trying to plant here in the U.S. But what if you had to try to clear fields from landmines first? We'll show you that next in From the Farm.
The 2023 Bracket Busters Challenge, presented by Case IH, is underway. Who's still in the game? To find out, head to AgWeb now through April 3rd to check the leaderboard.
Well, weather issues can be tough as farmers try to plant here in the U.S., but at least you aren't having to navigate around landmines. That's the case for farmers in Ukraine, as farmers there are having to take desperate measures digging landmines out of their fields themselves.
Okay, we've got more anti-tank mines here. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 anti-tank mines right here on the side of the road. He says, I brought them out of the field and placed them right here.
The 69-year-old farmer says he's desperate to plant seeds before planting, but can't because his fields are littered with landmines, some of which he found with this metal detector and dug out with his own hands.
He said, I was afraid, but I need to plant these fields.
That was Ivan Watson doing those interviews. He says every week there are reports in Ukraine of farmers badly wounded in a blast while trying to plant their fields. I just can't imagine what those farmers are going through right now. All right, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to tune in next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.